Hi, this is my new to me Grizzly pipe bender. I got it on a flash sale, what did he call that? For like 100 bucks. I always wanted one, but I always thought it was too expensive and couldn't afford. Well, today's the day. What I'm going to be doing here is mounting it to the floor in a way that I can still park my car here by removing the bolts and protecting those threads with some nylon bolts that will be removable. So I take those out, put that in place, and then when I'm done, take the regular bolts out, put the nylons in, and then that way I can just screw it to the floor when I need it, which isn't very often. So come along, it'll be fun. Okay, here's the plan. I'm going to drill a small hole in the concrete, then a bigger and a bigger and a bigger until I get to my final size of 5/8. Then I'm going to drill a 3/4 inch hole partially down to make room for the slightly wider cap bolt that will be used to protect the threads when the bolt is not installed. So I'm using some tape here to set a depth stop on each of the masonry bits so I don't go too deep. Most concrete pads are 4 inches deep, so I'm planning a hole for 3.5 inches deep. The tape makes sure that you don't go too deep because it's not that hard, and the hammer drill is insanely loud, and with all the dust and everything, and you get tired, and it's just so easy to make a mistake. So the tape just keeps you sane. I do have cordless drills with a hammer feature, but trust me, if you're drilling a hole anything bigger than 1/4 inch, you might as well just get a corded one or an insanely expensive battery powered one. This Porter cable I got on clearance for 40 bucks years ago, and really all I use it for is drilling holes in concrete, especially big stuff like this. It's a real trooper, but it got pretty hot by the time I was done shooting this video. I'm not sure if you can see it in this video here, but when you try to drill into concrete, the bit tends to walk around a little bit. I thought it would be easier to just drill a little and angle the bit around until I got the hole exactly where I wanted it. Once this pilot hole is drilled, every other drill bit bigger I use will follow this hole straight down. The point of all this is I'm trying to keep the holes exactly where I want them, so when I drop these giant bolts through the holes in the flange of the pipe bender, that they line up without a bunch of finagling around and I have to egg the holes out and blah 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 blah. So I just want it perfect on the first try, and for once I actually hit it on this project. The reason I swept it all up and vacuumed it is this dust is very fine and you really shouldn't breathe it. After I got as much out as I could, including vacuuming the holes, only then did I blow the last little bit out. I've learned drilling concrete holes that you really need to blow the dust out like this, otherwise the anchor just won't pound in. Once you start hammering the anchor in, you're screwed. You can see the 3/4 inch hole only goes halfway down and makes kind of a collar in the concrete. That's the relief for the nylon cap bolt, because it's a larger diameter than the 5/8 hole that the wedge anchor requires. These are special female wedge anchors that I actually had to buy off McMaster-Carr. I doubted I could find them local, so I didn't even bother to try. What I'm doing is I'm trying to determine how far in the bolt will be threaded into the wedge anchor for pounding. So that way I have about half the thread left to really snug the wedge anchor tight and set the wedge. So we never used a wedge anchor. These are 5/8 diameter on the outside. They're not just going to fall in, you have to smash them in. And when you crank on it like I'm doing here, you're setting that wedge forever. That thing will never come out. So what I'm doing is I'm doing it alone, one at a time, so the bolt will perfectly pull that wedge anchor straight up and down so that it's easy to thread in through the flange. Nothing sucks more than fighting with a bolt, trying to get it threaded in a concrete floor that you can't repair it. Note that I'm not using an impact gun here, I'm using a old school ratchet. The reason is that a very strong impact gun could rip the wedge anchor out or damage the threads. By doing it by hand, you can feel when it's really tight.
Wow, look at you. You going as Darth Vader?
Yep.
Cool. Is Diva gonna come show me what she's wearing too?
My careful planning has paid off, and the electrical tape depth stops on the drill bits worked out perfect. I've got about a ½ inch below the top of the concrete for the nylon cap bolt, which gives me a little room to spare to screw the bolt slightly below the surface. So I put this video in real speed. I did one test bend and I was shocked at how easy it was. This is 2" by 1/4" flat stock hot rolled steel. This would be a total bear to bend. And as you can see, my 5-year-old son did it without even straining. So I certainly can't wait to try something bigger, but needless to say, I think that the wedge anchors on this, I'll be able to really wail on this for some really big bends. Mostly I just hate it when you have to fight the tool, and so bolting it to the floor like this when I need to just makes the metalworking a more pleasant experience. So 99% of the time, this is what my floor would look like. I've got these nylon cap bolts that have a large hex drive. So if the nylon bolt broke off or stripped or whatever, I can just drill it out. Nylon's basically just plastic. I'm screwing them in slightly below the surface, and the nylon will keep the threads of the wedge anchor nice and clean so that they don't get a bunch of crud in them that negates their purpose. So I wanted to be able to scrape a shovel or something like that without it catching on the bolts sticking up above the floor. Here you can see that they are below flush, so it's perfect. Okay, so if you're wondering or just crave more information on how I pulled it off in the first try, here's a brief explanation. This is not my first foray into wedge anchors. I don't do them a ton, but I've learned a few things. The main thing to understand is that when you set a wedge, it tends to move from where you pounded it in. So you have to allow space for movement. So always pound it deeper than you really need it so that when you set the wedge and it comes up a little bit, it's not too high. So the blue here is the concrete itself. This orange and red here, this is the wedge anchor. So the wedge anchor in total was 2.5 inches long. I assumed the concrete was 4 inches, so I wanted to leave at least a little bit at the bottom. The nylon cap bolt here I bought about 1.5 inches long, so they gave me wide variety to go up or down here. So the way I planned the depths here out, putting the tape on, that's really the most important step here is the depth. So the other thing is when I got done drilling the holes, you'll notice I vacuumed them out and then I air compressor blew them out to make sure I can pound this wedge anchor all the way to the bottom. So when a wedge anchor works, you can just see it's a simple taper and there's this little metal collar with these nubs on it. So that's why I have to pound it in, because this collar is tightening just from the pounding in, and then when you pull the bolt, when the bolt pulls up on it, this wedge sets it into the concrete permanently and you'll never get that thing out. The green part here is that cap bolt, and I wanted to make sure no matter what happened with where the wedge ended up that the cap bolt would be below the surface. So I knew the cap was a 1/2 inch high here, and I knew that I had 1 inch here, so I basically planned for a 1/2 inch of margin depending on where this thing came up to. The box for the wedge anchor said you're supposed to drill it 5/8 hole, so that's what I did all the way down. Then I took the 3/4 inch bit, which is the diameter of this nylon cap bolt, and drilled exactly 1 inch down, and that's the shoulder you saw in the video. Then I pounded this sucker in all the way, and it should have lined up perfectly, and it basically did. Now, you'll see here that the wedge is pretty low, and so this thing has a little bit of tolerance of rocking side to side. The other thing you get into trouble with is if you just bolt it straight onto it, say through the metal flange of my pipe bender in this case, you could set the wedge at an angle, and that's what you don't want. Because the next time you try to thread the bolt in, it's going to be hard and you got to screw around, or maybe you got to egg the hole out of the flange, and it's just a bunch of screwing around. So you'll notice I actually set the wedge with a washer right here flat on the surface with a bolt straight through it down. So as it tightens, it theoretically should pull it more or less straight up. So I set it pretty tight like that. I backed them back out. I put the actual fixture on it and then bolted it down again even tighter. The video you saw of me installing it was literally on the first try. No trouble whatsoever. I used 1/2 inch bolts because there were 1/2 inch holes in the flange. A lot of people might use a slightly smaller bolt to give them a little bit of wiggle room. But for me, I wanted to use the biggest bolt I could because I know putting some big stuff in this bender, I'm gonna really be wailing on this thing. So I wanted it to be really in there. So anyways, that's how I pulled it off. Hope you enjoyed this short explanation. I hope my ugly colors made sense. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.